It never starts with a siren. There's no explosion, no protest sign, no breaking news segment. The quiet war on libraries doesn't make headlines because it's not designed to be loud. It's designed to be boring, bureaucratic, procedural, unremarkable. That's the genius of it. Because if you want to erase something from a culture, you don't burn it anymore. You just quietly underfund it, question its relevance, make it harder to access, and then eventually, once people have stopped showing up, you close the doors and call it progress. Across America, libraries, both physical and digital, are being challenged, defunded, restricted, and in some cases, outright erased. But not in a way that makes for a viral moment. These aren't dramatic scenes of books on fire. They're spreadsheets, policy memos, content moderation algorithms, closed-door committee votes. And behind it all is a creeping strategy that's harder to see but deeply intentional. Reduce what people can access, redefine what's appropriate, and quietly shift the boundaries of what counts as truth. The public narrative is framed as protection, especially for children. We're keeping kids safe, they say. We're removing sexually explicit material, or inappropriate content, or political bias. But when you zoom out and look at what's actually being targeted, you start to see the pattern. Books by queer authors, histories of slavery that name names, novels that explore gender identity, articles that question police policy, scientific journals that address climate change. It's not about safety, it's about control. And this isn't happening in just one region. It's a coast-to-coast movement, spreading like a quiet virus. In Texas, a school district pulled dozens of titles without notifying parents. In Florida, entire book lists are being reviewed under vague laws like "Don't Say Gay." In Missouri, a law now criminalizes librarians for distributing inappropriate materials, which, as defined, includes much of Black history and LGBTQ+ narratives. In Pennsylvania, libraries were denied funding for not meeting a political patriotism test. Even New York, a so-called liberal stronghold, has seen fights over digital censorship and budget cuts to public knowledge databases. But here's the thing, the quiet war isn't just about books. That's the decoy. The real fight is about information access in the 21st century, who gets to control it and who gets left out. Digital libraries are increasingly behind paywalls. Academic journals that used to be accessible through public library portals now require subscriptions. Content filtering in schools, public Wi-Fi networks, and library systems is becoming more aggressive, using algorithms that often block entire categories of knowledge by default. Kids trying to research reproductive health? Blocked. Adults trying to access criminal justice reform articles? Filtered. Community members trying to download public data on police budgets? Now redirected or dead-linked. And then there's the tech layer. Major publishing deals now allow companies like Amazon, Apple, and Google to dictate what digital library content gets surfaced. That means certain books may technically still exist, but try finding them in a school e-reader system or voice search. Try borrowing them through your library app and see what comes up instead. Algorithms bury what policy doesn't ban. Meanwhile, the people who rely on libraries the most, low-income families, immigrant communities, rural populations, and students without at-home internet, are the ones being hit hardest. When you cut off access to a physical library or restrict digital materials, it doesn't hurt the people who can buy books or subscribe to news. It hurts the kid whose only access to knowledge was the school library. It hurts the mother who reads banned titles to her child because they reflect her family's story. It hurts the college freshman who can't afford JSTOR and needs a free source to write a paper. This war on libraries is a class war, a culture war, and an ideological purge all rolled into one, but fought in the language of safety, efficiency, and cost saving. And here's what makes it so dangerous. Because it's not loud, it's not seen as urgent. There are no national debates about digital content filtering. There's no 24-hour news cycle about school libraries quietly losing entire shelves of books. And when there is backlash, it's often siloed, framed as a local issue instead of what it is, a coordinated national movement to shrink the commons, privatize access to information, and normalize ignorance as a feature, not a flaw. We used to say, knowledge is power, but power heard that. And now it's making sure knowledge costs too much to access or simply disappears before anyone notices. The moment you ask, "Who's behind all this?" the tone of the conversation shifts. It stops being about safety or children or morality. It becomes what it always was: politics and profit. Because once you start pulling at the thread of library censorship and public knowledge suppression, it doesn't take long before you hit names, real names, elected officials, lobby groups, private companies, and billion-dollar publishing deals that dictate what kind of knowledge survives and what kind gets erased. Let's start with the political machinery. In 2021 and 2022 alone, more than 2,500 individual book titles were targeted for removal from school and public libraries in the US, the highest number in recorded history. This wasn't organic. It wasn't a wave of outraged parents rising up simultaneously. This was orchestrated, coordinated, often manufactured. Much of the movement traces back to groups like Moms for Liberty, No Left Turn in Education, and similar organizations with strong financial backing and deep political ties. These groups present themselves as grassroots, but they're often connected to national conservative policy networks, including the Heritage Foundation, ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, and Turning Point USA. These organizations create ready-made playbooks for local activists, template complaint letters, talking points for school board meetings, even digital tools that let users search for problematic content in school libraries. But the real power lies with lawmakers. In states like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and Missouri, conservative legislatures passed bills granting nearly unchecked power to remove materials deemed inappropriate. What counts as inappropriate? That's the trick. The laws are vague on purpose. They use broad terms like obscene, indecent, or unbalanced, with no consistent criteria. That means all it takes is a single complaint from a parent, or in some cases, a politically motivated third party, to trigger a review, suspension, or permanent ban of a book or article. And it's not just literature. Library databases like ProQuest, JSTOR, EBSCOhost, and others have come under fire. In Texas, for example, lawmakers accused digital academic databases of left-wing indoctrination and began pushing for content filtering at the state level. In Utah, legislators proposed giving the Attorney General authority to block inappropriate digital content in public libraries, which included reproductive health materials and LGBTQ+ topics. These aren't fringe movements. They're backed by state budgets, coordinated legislation, and political media echo chambers. But censorship is only half the story. The other half is commercialization, how the erosion of public access makes room for private profit. The more public libraries and digital portals get defunded or restricted, the more space opens up for subscription platforms, corporate curriculum providers, and private e-learning tools to step in and sell access to knowledge. It's a classic enclosure strategy. Starve the commons, then rent it back to the public at a price. Consider this. Many school systems have stopped buying physical books altogether, instead turning to digital reading platforms like Overdrive, Epic, or ClassLink, many of which now offer curated libraries designed to be controversy-free. But these curated lists often exclude entire categories of work: Black history, queer literature, radical political thought, reproductive health, immigration stories, and any material flagged as potentially divisive. The platform doesn't ban it, they just don't offer it. And schools, under pressure to avoid lawsuits or complaints, comply without question. Meanwhile, traditional publishers are consolidating power. When Penguin Random House tried to acquire Simon & Schuster, it sparked major antitrust concerns, not just because of market size, but because of ideological control. If a handful of corporations determine what gets published, distributed, or promoted, then we've traded government censorship for corporate censorship. Quieter, sleeker, and much harder to fight. And don't forget the role of big tech. Google's search algorithm, YouTube's content filtering, Amazon's book ranking system. These tools decide what's seen and what's buried. They're not neutral. In 2019, reports surfaced that Google quietly removed certain results from its shopping and book platforms related to controversial political topics. Amazon has pulled titles for being too political while leaving violent, extremist content untouched. TikTok blocks hashtags for books that include queer characters. Facebook suppresses posts linking to archive.org and other open access digital libraries. Then there's the algorithmic discrimination baked into content moderation AI. Libraries and schools using smart filtering tools like GoGuardian or Lightspeed to protect kids from harmful content often end up blocking disproportionately more pages that mention Black Lives Matter, feminism, trans rights, or decolonization, not because of human choice, but because the algorithm was trained to flag those topics as sensitive. These tools aren't just flawed, they're dangerous, because they teach a generation of students that certain ideas should be hidden, not discussed, not engaged, not even seen. And while all of this is happening, local libraries are quietly vanishing. From 2010 to 2020, the number of public libraries in the U.S. declined, and funding in many areas dropped by 20% or more. Urban libraries have faced closures or service cuts. Rural libraries, often lifelines for internet access, have been gutted. Librarians are leaving not because of pay, but because they're under threat. Actual, physical threat. Bomb threats, harassment, doxing. In 2022 alone, more than a dozen libraries across states like Colorado, Michigan, and New York reported violent threats following public events involving drag readings, race discussions, or queer authors. So when we ask why now, the answer is simple: because it works. This quiet war on access is effective precisely because it operates through policy, profit, and fear. It creates just enough plausible deniability for politicians to wash their hands, enough algorithmic invisibility for tech companies to dodge blame, and enough chaos for the public to feel overwhelmed and powerless. And in that fog, the walls keep closing in. The war on access doesn't feel like a war until you try to find something that's no longer there. You go to search for a book you remember reading as a teen, and it's missing from the school catalog. You click on a link someone sent you in a discussion thread about policing and budgets, and the page is gone. You ask your local library about a health resource, and they tell you it was removed because of recent guidance. You walk into a branch, and it's permanently closed. No notice, no news, just shuttered. This is what manufactured forgetting looks like. Not destruction, but disappearance. And maybe that's the scariest part, because it means the next generation may never even know what they were supposed to be able to access in the first place. The people behind these bans, restrictions, and digital erasures understand something deep. Knowledge is not just content, it's memory. And memory is power. If you can control what people remember, or better yet, what they never learn, you can control the direction of entire communities. You can rewrite history without picking up a pen. You can rig the future without firing a shot. That's the end game. But let's be clear, this isn't new. There's a long and ugly tradition of those in power trying to control the flow of information under the guise of protection. In Nazi Germany, it was literal book burnings. In the Jim Crow South, Black children were forbidden from using white libraries. During the Cold War, artists, academics, and authors were blacklisted for un-American activities. In every era, the story is the same. Fear gets weaponized to shrink access, and control gets dressed up as care. What's different now is the scale and the subtlety. In 2025, you don't need to ban a book to erase it. You just need to cut a library's budget so they can't afford it, change the search algorithm so it ranks lower, flag it in a filter so it's temporarily hidden, get one angry parent to complain at a school board meeting, convince a tech company it might cause PR backlash. Now it's gone. And when you multiply that 1,000 times across the country, across topics, across generations, you end up with a population that believes what's left behind is all there ever was. They don't know what they're missing because they were never allowed to see it. We call it censorship, but that word feels too formal, too cold and distant. This is closer to gaslighting on a cultural scale. You know something feels off, but you can't prove it. You remember reading something once, but it's gone now. You hear about a ban in another state, but you're told, that would never happen here. You walk into your local library and it still feels normal, until you realize the reference desk is gone, the shelves are thinner, and nobody's checking out anything controversial anymore. So what happens when people give up trying to remember what they're not allowed to know? They stop asking questions. They stop pushing. they stop learning. And that's when you've won, not by argument, but by absence. But here's the part that gives this war its weakness. You can't kill memory that easy. Even if you gut the institutions, censor the texts, rewrite the lessons, truth has a way of leaking through the cracks. That's why so many people still fight for banned books. That's why teachers smuggle in photocopies of redlined chapters. That's why zines and PDFs and bootleg Google Drives exist. That's why independent media and archives and small presses haven't disappeared. They've gone underground and digital and community-based. That's also why the library is still one of the most radical places in America. It's a space where you don't need a credit card or credentials to get access. It's a space where you can learn about things your school won't teach. It's one of the last truly public, non-transactional places left. And the people running them? They know exactly what's at stake. Because when the power structure starts targeting librarians, educators, and archivists, not just what they stock, but who they are, it's not about content. It's about control. It's about reminding those people that they're not just keeping books. They're keeping the lights on. They're guarding the memory vault. So now what? Maybe the fight isn't about preserving everything exactly as it was. Maybe it's about building a parallel archive, a people's archive, one that's not dependent on approval, funding, or politics, one that lives in digital corners, home libraries, printouts passed between friends, and communities that still believe access matters, one that doesn't ask permission to preserve the truth. And maybe that archive isn't even just books anymore. Maybe it's videos, audio, open source data, underground newsletters, interviews. Maybe it's the Truth Project. Maybe it's something we haven't even imagined yet. What matters is this: don't stop remembering, don't stop asking, don't stop learning. The more they try to bury the truth, the more reasons we have to dig. And if all else fails, we start our own damn library.